Hello, my favorite listener. It's Friday, and we've got a new arc starting for you over here at Into the Dark of the Woods. This is episode 1 of The Laughing Flame. This 5-part arc is going to take us through the holiday season. At the end of it, we're going to take a little bit of a break, because it's been a lot. It's been a lot, gang. But look, we're already on our 3rd arc for a brand new show. How do you like those apples? This is a Rust Belt Studio production. There are 2 others, Mikey and the Garden Arch, and The Engine of War. Both of them run on Tuesdays opposite each other. All of our shows launch 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. I'm excited to get this arc going. I hope you are too. Settle in. The show's about to start. Bay Furnace, Michigan, 1877. The wind had scoured the shoreline raw, tearing across Lake Superior and driving snow into the pines until the trees bent under its weight. Bay Furnace stood at the edge of that frozen world, a squat stone stack coughing sparks into the black December sky. The smelter ran day and night, no matter the weather, because the fire could not be allowed to cool. Iron demanded constant heat, and men were cheaper than ore. They brought the body in on a sled. 4 men, shoulders hunched against the gale, dragged it across the hard crust of snow. The shape beneath the canvas tarp was stiff, edges sharp where limbs had frozen in place. The youngest of them kept glancing behind as if afraid the thing might sit up. He had never hauled a dead man before. The others had, though not often, and not in winter lately. They stopped near the furnace stack. The ground here was as unforgiving as iron itself. Frost sunk down through rock and earth. A pick would bounce, a spade would break. They had no means to cut a grave, not until the thaw. The body would rot in camp, and no man wanted that. The foreman stood waiting, torch in hand, eyes narrowed against the blowing snow. He didn't speak at first, he just looked at the tarp and then at the furnace. The men shifted, restless, knowing what he was about to say. Finally he muttered, low enough to sound like an apology. "Best we can do." No one argued. They had fed the fire before, not men, but mules that broke legs on the icy trails, too heavy to butcher, too stubborn to bury. The furnace took them clean, no bones, no stink, just ash on the wind. Some of the crew swore that the iron came out stronger after that. Others kept that thought quiet. The youngest man twisted his face up. "It ain't right." "Neither sitting in a shed for months waiting on thaw," one of the older miners said. "He'd want the fire." They lifted the tarp and slid the body forward. The canvas rasped on the iron lip of the charge hole. For a heartbeat the body balanced there, a shape outlined by sparks rising from below. Then they tipped it in. The furnace roared, flames swallowing cloth, flesh, bone. A burst of light shot up the stack, showering sparks into the storm. The men stepped back, heat licking their faces even through the gale. It was over quick, cleaner than they expected. Or it should have been. The sparks did not fade. The foreman did not move when the sparks lingered. He stood with his torch lifted, mouth half open, as if the furnace had spoken to him in a language made of crackling and hiss. The other men shuffled, uneasy, watching the light pulse brighter instead of dim. "It should be done. It usually always fades quick." But it wasn't fading. The sparks had gathered at the mouth of the stack, curling and clinging like embers caught in a draft. They coiled, joined, stretched until they seemed to take on a shape of their own. Not just a flicker, not just a trick of the eyes. Something that held together, glowing red in the storm. The youngest man stepped back, boots sliding in the crusted snow. "It's coming out!" The foreman finally moved. He raised his torch and thrust it forward toward the furnace mouth, as if warning whatever hovered there back inside. For a moment the sparks scattered, flying into the snow like fireflies, but as each ember struck, it melted through the crust and hissed, leaving holes that smoked. "Not natural," the oldest miner whispered. His breath hung white in the air. They had all seen flames. Wildfires in the jack pine, stoves gone wrong, cabins lost to spark and grease. Fire always moved the same way, downwind, upward, never still. But this flame clung to its form, rising taller, shoulders, arms, a crown of sparks. The men could not decide if it was a man or something that had only borrowed the shape of one. Its body wavered, lit from inside by the same glow that burned ore into iron. And as the gale tore at the furnace stack, the figure bent, leaned forward, and laughed. Not loud, not thunder, but a sound like iron splitting under frost, sharp and final. The youngest dropped his gloves. He would have run then if the foreman hadn't barked his name. "Hold steady, Elias, it ain't real." But the boy's boots were already sliding backward, eyes locked on the glowing crown above the stack. The others stared too, rooted where they stood, every man thinking the same thing but too afraid to say it out loud. We fed the fire more than iron. We gave it a body, and it kept it. The thing began to climb. It didn't use the iron rungs bolted to the furnace stack. It had no need for ladders. The sparks themselves clung together, shifting like molten insects, limbs forming and reforming with every gust of wind. The crown bent lower, its eyes nothing but hollows where the heat pulsed white. The miner still stood frozen, every instinct screaming to move, to run, but something in the fire's glow held them still. Heat poured from the shape, but the storm refused to quench it. Snowflakes that should have melted against its shoulders instead turned black in midair, falling as ash. One of the older men muttered a prayer under his breath, something in Cornish. Another crossed himself. The foreman did neither. He took a slow step forward, boots sinking into the crust of snow, and raised his torch like a weapon. "Back inside," he said, though his voice broke on the words. "Back where you belong." The figure tilted its head. The laugh came again, sharper, longer this time, a groan of splitting timber and grinding stone. The men clapped hands to their ears, but the sound wasn't loud in any ordinary way. It rattled in the bones and pressed behind the eyes. Then it moved. It dropped from the stack, a fall that should have scattered it into sparks. Instead, the snow hissed and boiled where it landed, throwing up steam in violent bursts. When the cloud cleared, the fire stood upright, taller now, its form solidifying, burning red against the dark shoreline. Every step it took left holes in the snow that smoked and bled downward, as if the ground itself was made of wax. Young Elias cried out and stumbled backward, and the foreman caught him by the collar, yanked him upright. "Don't turn your back!" The fire tilted forward, sniffing as though it could smell the men through the storm. Its crown of sparks guttered, then flared higher, lighting the drifts in pulsing orange. For a moment, its body resolved into something too human, a chest, shoulders, a jawline formed of ember-cracked stone, but then it shifted again, becoming all antlers of smoke, impossible to pin down. "Run," the oldest miner said. He didn't shout, he simply dropped his shovel and turned toward the dark trees. The others followed without needing orders, and the youngest was half-dragged by the foreman, boots slipping, breath sharp in his throat. Behind them, the fire took a step and the snow sagged into a glowing hollow. The gale howled through the smelter yard, filling the air with whips of spark torn from the furnace mouth. Those sparks flew toward the figure, clinging to it like filings to a magnet. With each spark absorbed, the shape grew steadier, heavier. By the time the men reached the tree line, it was moving at a steady pace across the yard, molten footprints marking its trail. One man looked back. He wished he hadn't. The fire turned its head toward him, and though it had no face or no eyes, he felt it look directly into him, and he saw the coal of his lungs, the heat of his blood. He stumbled on a root, scrambled up again, and ran harder. The foreman did not look back. He dragged young Elias into the trees, muttering under his breath, "Fire to fight fire, it's the only way." The others heard him, and though they didn't answer, each of them carried the words like a brand seared into their thoughts. Behind them, the fire's laughter cracked across the shoreline carried by the storm. It was not done. It had only just begun to eat. The woods swallowed the miners one by one, boots crashing through undergrowth, branches snapping like gunfire, but the storm made running blind. Snow fell so hard it blurred tree trunks into ghostly pillars, and every breath stung like iron in the throat. Behind them, the fire followed, not fast, but steady, each footfall sinking deep and glowing. Its laughter carried with the gale, sharp as breaking glass. Elias tripped in a drift and cried out. The foreman dragged him up by his collar and shoved him forward. His own eyes darted over his shoulder, measuring the thing's distance. It wasn't rushing them. It didn't need to. Fire didn't have to chase. Fire waited, patient as hunger. One of the older miners stumbled to a stop, and he turned, face streaked with frozen sweat, and hissed between his teeth, "We can't run. It'll take the whole camp." The others pulled up short. Their lungs heaved steam into the black air, but they knew he was right. The bunkhouses sat less than 200 yards behind them, canvas stretched tight against the storm. Men slept inside, unaware. If the fire reached those walls, they'd burn like tinder. The foreman's jaw clenched. He looked back across the yard. The smelter stack still roared, flames pouring upward, feeding the thing with every spark. It had grown stronger in minutes, steadier, taller. Soon it wouldn't be content with walking. Soon it would leap. Fire to fight fire. We burn it out. What? You want us to set the whole works? The foreman cut him off. We have no choice. If it lives, it eats us all. The men exchanged glances. They had built Bay Furnace with their hands, carried ore by sled and sack, shoveled charcoal until their backs bent. Burning it meant burning their own labor, their food, their shelter. But none of them argued. Every instinct screamed the same truth. If they didn't burn it, it would burn them. The foreman shoved the boy toward the tree line. "Run to camp. Wake 'em. Tell 'em to clear out. Go!" Elias hesitated only a second before bolting, legs pumping through the snow. The others turned back toward the furnace. They drew torches from the smelter shed, sparks biting their gloves as they struck flint. In moments, the yard glowed with fresh fire. The laughing flame tilted its head, curious. The crown of sparks guttered, then flared bright as if amused at the offering. The foreman hurled his torch onto the roof of the charcoal storehouse. The dry timbers caught instantly, orange racing across the shingles. The others followed, flinging flames onto the tool sheds, the loading dock, the very walls of the furnace shed itself. One man poured lamp oil in a crooked line through the yard, and fire licked it up like a fuse. The yard became a storm of its own. Smoke boiled, sparks cascaded sideways in the wind, roofs sagged under their own burning weight. The men staggered back, coughing, eyes watering. The laughing flame in the yard stepped forward as if to embrace the blaze, but instead of feeding, the new inferno seemed to tear at it, dragging pieces away, scattering its shape into fragments. It raised its arms, crown blazing, and for the first time it screamed, not laughter, but rage, a howl that made snow leap from the ground. The foreman's men ran, dragging each other toward the tree line, half blind from smoke. Behind them, the entire works burned higher than the tallest pines. Flames rose in sheets, bending sideways in the gale and devouring wood and stone alike. And in the middle of it, the laughing flame thrashed and flailed, cinders torn from its body and whirling into the sky. It didn't vanish. It didn't die. But the blaze scattered it, broke it into sparks too small to hold shape. They flew up, vanished into the storm, and the yard was left to the fire alone. The foreman bent double at the tree line, sucking air through a soot-caked throat. He looked back once at the yard, at the inferno that they had unleashed, and said the only words that would come, "God forgive us." The storm had spent itself by morning. The sky turned a brittle blue, clouds stretched thin like gauze across the horizon. Snow still fell in whispers, but the gale had gone, leaving only a steady groan of ice shifting along the superior shore. The miners came back in silence. No one wanted to, Yet all of them felt drawn. They walked in a line from the bunkhouse, boots crunching through a crust of ash that had settled in the night. The air smelled wrong, sweet and acrid all at once, like roasted meat mixed with slag. Men coughed into their sleeves and kept moving. Bay Furnace was no longer a furnace. It was a ruin, a blackened skeleton against the white drifts. The stack that had once coughed sparks into the sky was cracked open, stone split by its own heat, edges fused into glossy lumps of glass. Where the sheds had stood were only charred ribs of timber jutting up from ash heaps. Smoke lifted in lazy threads as though the ground still dreamed of fire. The foreman stopped first, boots at the edge of the wreck. He did not speak. His face was streaked with soot, beard rimmed in ice, eyes hollowed from a night without sleep. The others gathered behind him, looking everywhere but at one another. They found no trace of the body they had carried in on the sled. No bones, no scraps of cloth, not even a buckle or button. Everything had gone into the blaze, burned down to memory. One of the older men spat in the snow. "We scattered it. It can't hold shape now." Another shifted uneasily. "Sparks fly further than you think." The foreman heard them but gave no answer. He stepped closer into the ruin, heat still radiating up through his soles. Each footprint left a damp patch as snow hissed and melted. He reached the lip of the cracked stack and peered down. At first he saw only slag, black and glossy, cooled into grotesque shapes that resembled melted faces. Then, deeper in the dark, something pulsed. A faint red glow no bigger than a coal. It throbbed slowly, steady as a heartbeat. The foreman froze and his breath stopped in his chest. The ember flared once as if aware it was being watched, and a thin thread of smoke curled upward, brushing the foreman's face. He staggered back. For a moment he thought of calling the others, but the words lodged in his throat. What good would it do? Better they believed it gone, better no one knew what still breathed in the slag. When he turned away, the ember flared again, brighter before dimming once more. The men walked back to camp without speaking. Each carried his own memory of the night, the laughter like iron breaking, the figure of Sparks stepping out into the storm, the scream swallowed by fire. None of them would set it to words. The wind would take those words and carry them and spread them like cinders. Behind them, the ruins of Bay Furnace smoldered quietly, gray smoke rising into the blue morning. Travelers would come years later and see only stone remnants, moss climbing the walls, snow drifted against the slag. They would take photographs, scratch names into the rock, tell stories about the industry lost to fire. But the men who had stood there that night would know better. They would know the fire had eaten more than iron. They would know the blaze had not died, only slept. And at least one man would not forget the way the ember pulsed in that ruin, slow and patient, like something waiting for a mouth to feed it again. Hello again. That concludes episode 1 of the new arc, The Laughing Flame. That one came in a little hot, not gonna lie. This show is a production of Rust Belt Studio and was written and narrated by Bryan Foster. You can find it and the other 2 shows that we do here, Mikey and the Garden Arch and The Engine of War, wherever you found this podcast. Like, share, subscribe, all go a long way to helping out the studio, but if you'd like to do more, you can always join our Patreon and the link is in the show notes below. For just $2 a month, you will get early and ad-free access to all 3 of the shows that I just mentioned. At $5, you get access to the Projectionist booth, where we'll have exclusive content that only you will see. Well, you and the $9 executive producer tier, who get access to all of those things, plus help shape the future of the studio. We'll see you here again on Friday, and until next time, my favorite listener.